Time to join us today. Today is what do we got? We got September 26th. We're just shy of 5:30 Mountain Time on this wonderful Tuesday. We're grateful for those folks that have joined us. We've got a wonderful call today, and a lot of things are happening, and look forward to giving at least providing some context and updates. We'll go through some of the new technologies as well as some of the advancements in kind of the industry in general and some of the progress that's been made this last week. And then we'll go through any kind of Q&A or topics that you'd like to discuss. So thank you for being here, as well as those moderators that are here. If you do have support-related questions, don't hesitate to ping them on the support world. These are some of the emails as well as they're on the calls. We've got Elle, Terrence, and Wally joining us today. So thank you for those attendants. As a reminder, this is a private membership association. Some of the things we may talk about might be forward-looking. As a reminder, this is basically connecting in a decentralized system, which combines an access device, a phone, with storage. There's lots of pieces behind it, but we're grateful for those that are here to learn and to review it. For those that would like to join actually the live, dialogue and interactions, you can either connect at rippleeffect.clear.events, or there's two other ones that are provided that are somewhat private, but this is kind of the general populace if you'd like to come in and just have some questions. So this is primarily a digital world town hall, and one of the biggest things that's kind of happened over this last week is we had an opportunity to participate, or at least to try and participate, within an ecosystem called the Digital Government Summit Series. Now, this is a series that actually goes through multiple states. I'm going to check and make sure this is streaming. So it's a series that goes through multiple states, and it just so happens that Hawaii was yesterday. And it's disheartening on multiple levels because, and I don't know if they're just trying to do their best because of the reality that's happened in Lahaina, and people are upset. People are calling people out on what it is, and there's a lot of confusion is not a big enough, deep enough word, but a lot of hurt that is massive, and it's not going away in time. It's actually festering and getting worse, primarily because the lack of transparency at the government level, statewide, as well as at the county level, is becoming more and more difficult. Why does this matter? Why is this important? Most folks on this call are within colonial-based countries. That colonial-based countries being those that have come out of Britain, there may be Canada, Australia, New Zealand. These are countries that, along with a lot of islands, they were colonialized, and they basically have a certain type of parliament and ministries that run the country. So it's not a kingdom-based country. It's not a similar, structure as a president-based country. It's a prime minister-based country. And the reason I bring this up, and the reason I bring Hawaii up in the middle of it, what I'll do is I'll actually kind of pull open a map here, so you can see, there's a lot of small little nations that are peppered around big countries, and these big countries, namely, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, they've already had an element of control that has gone throughout the system. So their ID systems, their banking systems, New Zealand was one of the first ones to use what's called FPOS, which is a money system that's all going digital now. But you have the United States of America that this hasn't actually crept into yet, per se. Some people would argue with me and say, no, Mike, it's already crept in. You can see it with the masks. You can see it with the voting. You can see it in the counties, blue and red. But I would argue that the control that they're talking about, or at least that I'm referring to, really ties to something that's even more concerning. It's not just about social distancing. It's not just about masks and 6 feet away. It's deeper than that. It goes to, or even polarizing from right or left. What we're talking about is the ability to actually control not only where one can travel physically, but where one can actually transact. And so 2 Februarys ago, so there's probably 17 months ago, Mr. Biden had an executive order that talked about programmable money. And programmable money will tie to an individual, and the individual have an ID, a real ID that will tie to how they can actually travel or move. And it's not just in this different 50 states, which, by the way, in 2025, that real ID will actually have to be in place. Be literally, it will need to be locked down with a type of driver's license that are state-based. One would say, why are states the ones that actually are doing the ID? When, voters and registration and land and sheriffs, all that ties to counties. Well, there's a conversation around that, but that's not today. But at this state event that we went to here in Hawaii yesterday, they literally locked it down on multiple levels. So as for those that are here because they understand kind of the history that we all have with technology, not only were we kicked out of the event 3 different ways, but the transparency of what's happening at these events and who's behind the events and how they're actually organized is becoming very evident and interesting. For those of you that know me, I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I struggle to try and jump on a lot of those bandwagons, not because I don't believe that they're real, but because I don't believe that they add any value within the mind or the spirit base of why we're here and where we're going. I have a lot of folks that I've associated with and work with, and it's very clear to see, you see the glass that's half full or half empty perspective. But at this event, it was very eye-opening to see the hard line that is actually being drawn. And the reason that I believe that what's happening when we talk about these colonial-based countries, so, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, again, and Israel is another one that's a similar conversation. But they're starting with these larger countries, and I believe that Hawaii is actually the first full-blown state to actually start implementing some of these systems and policies. That's not saying that the rest of the country, each state, actually 56 different states, that they're not implementing similar technologies that's centralized, namely running Oracle backends with productivity apps and identity apps that basically are all centralized by the state. And then they integrate nationally, and not just nationally, but it'll integrate into some of the travel stuff. So they're literally locking down the physical ability to travel based upon identity, and then the ability to transact based upon that identity. So travel and transacting, whether it's one's assets, whether it's something from a cash flow standpoint or real assets that'll tie into land management, property management, and then also how it kind of goes from generation to generation. For those of you that weren't aware, almost every state has massive, I'm talking hundreds of millions of dollars every year that is just lost or unclaimed based upon people passing away. And this shouldn't be something that's just ignored. Why? Because as generations come and go, that wealth, if not protected or transferred, can actually, in the process of probate and others, especially with how the legal system currently works, just get lost. And it doesn't always just get lost. In some ways, it may end up in hands that are centralized hands. And some folks may say, well, that doesn't make a lot of sense. For instance, let's say that Hawaii in general, 80% of the land that's currently out there is actually not developed. Or in Fiji, it's actually 87% is actually not developed. Or if it is, it's owned by the actual, in Fiji's world, it's actually the country of Fiji. And if people want to use a part of that land, they basically pay a lease that then goes back to the people. But what I'm trying to provide clarity on is I really believe that Hawaii is the first state to actually roll out a lot of the control that's not just going to hit what they're talking about with smart cities or centralized payments or centralized housing that ties to credit, that is what they would call fair or equal housing. All of this is just elements of control. But what we're seeing in Hawaii is control without transparency. So for instance, meetings that are open meetings where they're taxpayer dollars that are supposedly happening, these meetings are not open at all. They're not recorded the right way. They're not transcribed the right way. They're not posted the right way. They're not Some of the meetings have actually been, you can see that enough prior advance notice has been provided for them. But the open meeting laws are laws that actually have to use when you're spending governmental funds, you're supposed to follow these laws. And it's not happening here. And it's very interesting to see where vendors, so for instance, I was actually not only just an individual that got kicked out, then re-signed up as a vendor because they said you had to actually be an employee of the state or a vendor, which before this had ever happened, I had been asked to basically be involved in these series. And when I started looking at the series and understanding what they were about, I could see that this is all centralized tech, so I didn't want to be involved in it. But when I saw it actually hitting here and tried to understand it, this talk right here, they wanted me to actually give a keynote on because I had requested it. So the importance of identity and access management for government. So I was actually giving this original, it was a keynote. They turned it into a moderation with a bunch of leaders, so to speak. And what I found very interesting was when they found out that I was associated with the Hawaii or Hawaiian, I'll pull up the site here. Actually, I don't even have it up. Maybe I do. This Hawaiian Life, because as they were going through, they wanted to look at, where did it go? They wanted to look at presentations. And so I had to divulge this. After they actually saw my presentation and it tied to this, they invited me, even after paying $15,000, they invited me to not participate. So what that should, at least what it told me, is they're trying to control the narrative. They're trying to control the message, and it's primarily based upon the actual vendors that are already there. Now let's look at some of the vendors that are there. So these are companies that are already selected. So if you don't know who Cloudflare is, they will control the DNS layer and obfuscation layer within DNS, so that if sites need to be taken offline, majority of the systems and infrastructure underneath it, even underneath the top level domain systems. So it's a technical layer underneath where you've got a name that's resolving with xyz.com. So they can basically control the DNS side of it, which is a very key part of it. They were also all over the World Economic Forum in Davos when we were there. Massive warning signs here. Oracle. So Oracle is basically a database structure and an operating system. They take the operating system from Red Hat Enterprise Linux, also known as CentOS or known as Fedora, and it was bought by IBM and recently actually closed. So the folks at Red Hat Enterprise Linux sold out to IBM for $34 billion in cash. And along the way, Oracle basically took that code and forked it and created a binary replacement called Oracle OS. And they've got a couple other names that they've called it by over the years. But the operating system and the database combined is what the centralized systems are running on, and they may run them on different architectures such as AWS and others. Now, why this matters, why people may care about it, the architecture that we have here within these are really two different operating systems. So you have ClearOS Mobile that connects into ClearOS Server. And ClearOS Server, just like Oracle, what they did is it's actually a binary replacement of Red Hat Enterprise Linux. So the back-end computing capabilities around the server architecture is the same type of technology that you'll see in these centralized systems. But instead of layering it on centralized data stores, and I'll just call them data centers, if you will, like AWS, Rackspace, etc. It allows an architecture around storage to be used with keys that are unlocked, so 12 words that are unlocked by the individual to be able to log in and then be able to get into systems. So the rest of them are all basically network layer 2, 3, and 4, maybe 5 switches. Some are from the accounting side of it, so Ernst & Young, which in this new system, it really ties together. Document signing system. So literally, whether we're talking about server, network, gateway, cloud provider, DNS provider, all of these different types of systems, and I can't say all, you've got some that are going to be, Salesforce or other things, but for the majority, it was a very closed network of vendors, even though there were others that were willing to spend money to go in and actually provide their perspective as a sponsor, as a paid sponsor. So what was interesting is as we went through this event, there were people that didn't understand. And I didn't come in. There was a lot of protesters that were outside the event. They talked about shutting down traffic and just tons of different things. Why? Because it ties to these 5-minute cities, 15-minute cities, 10-minute cities, however you want to look at it, but supposed cities that are smart. And really what they do is they will take data from an individual if you can get into them. So you have to be a part of the credit worthiness crowd to be able to get into these ecosystems. And once you're into them, you comply in a certain way. And so it's a very alarming wasn't the right word, because it's been rolling out for a long time. It's nothing that's really new. It's the technology's there, but it's a matter of how they're organizing now and shunning the populace. For instance, there were people that showed up and said, hey, I want to just pay $500 and I want to attend some of the workshops. Sorry, if you're not an employee of the government, particularly local government, Hawaiian government, you're not welcome here. Or if you're not a sponsor, you're not welcome here. So it's these events that are getting locked down, and then the agenda and the indoctrination around what's going on to make it normal for the state employees to say, you know what, this is how ID is going to be rolled out. This is how data is going to be rolled out. This is how counties and infrastructure is going to be rolled out. And that goes counterproductive, especially in the Hawaiian Islands, around what is acceptable for life. And what you're seeing with the Lahaina fires is a culture that wants to rebuild a certain way. The people may not understand this, but where this was actually in Honolulu on Oahu, this is the new capital for Hawaii of the United States of America, for Americans. But the original kingdom of the Hawaiian Islands was actually in Lahaina, which is on Maui. Now, the people there are solid. They stand up for what they know to be true. They care about family. They care about God. And it's not some mixture topic around, is it your God or is it my God, or what God is this? It's, we have a creator. You could admit that, you can believe that we don't, and so be it. Everyone can have their own opinion. That's not why we're here. But they really, truly put their actions and their beliefs where their pocketbook is. And that's why Lahaina wasn't for sale, and why people went and did a lot of the things that happened. And I'm not going to say that these are lasers or satellites that caused this, even though I can tell you satellites were traveling right over that. People triangulated it. Even though I've been to the cars and the different buildings, and I've seen how the paint and the glass has just melted in ways I've never seen fires act. Weird, very weird, where trees don't burn. Natural stuff that you would think would just incinerate, they don't burn. Or where, if you've got a blue roof on your house, or you got a blue color paint job on your car, how it didn't burn. I'm not going to jump on that conspiracy theory, but what I will say is water didn't flow. Sirens didn't go off. Many died that didn't have to die. And the community that's local, and I'm going to be specific around what I'm observing with the state and the county, they're not listening to what the individuals want. And what's being rebuilt is being rebuilt in a very sporadic way, in such a way where, container homes are really what's going up. And that's not what people want to live in. They're putting them on a 2-year lease of land, when the land, I won't even argue about land and the quality of homes right now, because that's going to be a topic in the future. But I just wanted to bring that up, primarily bring that up because I believe that Hawaii truly is one of, and don't get me wrong, this is happening in other states, but not to the same level that it's happened with Mr. Trudeau out of Canada. And, the supposed prime minister that just resigned, well, she resigned probably 6 months ago, Jacinda out of New Zealand. But the leadership that is here is exhibiting the same types of behaviors that you would see in these other countries that are not free. And I've been in Hawaii for a while now. I don't know. We started the journey in January, primarily into the Pacific, and into the Pacific for a couple reasons. And one of the other things that happened yesterday, which is the 25th of September, is this document here went live after a meeting that I believed in many levels was very much staged and structured. And there's good things and there's bad things that tie to this. But I'm jumping topics on you now, so I hope you can kind of link this together in your head. But it's not only moving from colonial-based countries like New Zealand, Australia, and Canada and focusing in on Hawaii, but it's focusing in on the Pacific. And there's a reason why we've been focused on the Pacific as well. So this is a document that came out from the Mr. Biden around multiple things. A couple of the big things that are inside of here is Aitutaki and Rarotonga, known as the Cook Islands, basically have been recognized by the United States of America as a sovereign and independent country. That's a big thing. I know I've been talking to Mark, the prime minister over there, for 3+ years, and that was a big thing to try and get recognized there. So they're going to be able to have passports. They're going to be able to have IDs. We'll see what, we already know where those are going, but there's a structure behind it that I truly believe that the Cook Islands is a country that will actually stand up for what's right when it's said and done. When you look past the pocketbooks, in this particular document, we're talking about, so you see $7.2 billion in funding there for the Pacific Islands, $200 million in funding from, and these are all, whether it's the United States of America or other bodies that are coming together. I'll kind of come through this right here. So you see, this is from the Congress of the United States of America for organizations or countries that are in the Pacific Islands. And it's usually in some ways issued through the World Bank based on the International Monetary Fund approving certain recommendations. So I'll give you an example, and I could pull up some pictures if you want, but I think you've already seen them before. They have these meetings of these different countries, and they're usually different people in roles, maybe in finance, maybe in infrastructure, maybe in economic development, but they pull them in and they do exactly what just happened at this event here, where they have this private event for a certain period of time. They put you up in a nice hotel. They pay for your flight. They pay for your hotel. They pay for your food. They pay for you to take a break. But ultimately, and the more I've worked with a lot of these folks from the Pacific, they're actually super duper people. They have good ethics, good morals, good values. They stand up for what's right. And they're not just taking bribes per se, but they're listening, they're observing. And a gentleman, a close dear friend of mine, used an analogy like this. They're like children in a brand new candy shop, but all they're selling is the same type of candy bar. They don't show them the cotton candy and the different flavored soda and the different textures, and they show them, here's the candy shop, and this is your one candy bar that's the option. You will do KYC this way, know your customer. You will do anti-money laundering this way. And if you follow those two recommendations by the IMF, then the World Bank will actually look at you and give you these funds that are created out of nothing from these different working committees within these different areas. So this is a really important topic where they talk about $810 million for assistance, over a certain period of time, $200 million here and there. And it literally, we're talking about $7.2 billion that all encompasses within this ecosystem. The other thing that happened was not just the Cook Islands, but Niue. So this is a small island ecosystem kind of near Samoa, Tonga area. And in my opinion, kind of like Tonga and Samoa, Niue, and the Cook Islands, these are four countries where their leaders, when you really get down to it, not the prime minister and minister of this and minister of that, but the actual culture of the people. These are people that will stand up for what is right when it's all said and done. And so what you're seeing here is an attempt from the United States of America's current presidency, or whatever you want to call them, as throwing a ton of money. So 7.2 billion. And you got to remember, this is coming on the outskirts of a lot of countries throwing money at countries that are in the Pacific, like Vanuatu and Tuvalu. And actually, Tuvalu is not one that would fit in that category. But Papua New Guinea, Kiribati, Vanuatu, these are all countries that have recently gone through some type of significant change or some type of a treaty, maybe with China. So, for instance, there was money that was actually received, many, many tens of millions of dollars, and I won't be specific, from China into the Cook Islands. So Atutaki and Rarotonga are two of the smallest islands in the world that have a fiber connection to them. Atutaki is the smallest country, I think there may be one more, that has a fiber connection to it in the world. And they did that by going into debt. And not only that, but they rolled out some data centers and they did a bunch of other stuff. In some cases, they build ports, but they basically take money from these larger countries. And these larger countries like the United States and China, as well as in this last large tranche, which is bigger than anything any of us have seen. So for instance, this document is all about $7.2 billion. The China, Taiwan, and US transaction was 91 trillion. 91 trillion. If that's the first time you're hearing that type of a number or dollar amount, you really got to look at how these systems actually work to understand where the money's coming from, to understand who's actually doing what. And that's one of the interesting things about this event is we're finding that private companies are actually the ones that are organizing these events and just calling it government technology. So I'll jump off of that topic. Hopefully you understand, these are indoctrination processes that are training basically states on how they will roll out technology that ties to a conversation around anti-money laundering, know your customer, which, by the way, when we start talking about blockchain or decentralized systems that have any kind of real ledger behind them, there's total accounting and transparency behind it. So for instance, today, if someone spends $1, so this $20, let's see what year it was printed. It was printed in 2017. Well, what day was it printed? How many hands is it transferred to? What kind of ATM has it been in? I mean, the ability to actually know the history of this, they do have some identifiers on it. For instance, you've got certain numbers up here, but they don't really know how many hands it touched or where it did. In the ledger world that's using blockchain or decentralized type technology, 100% of it is totally transparent. You can even see, this one got 2, and then it's broke into this one had 1 and 1. I mean, or it can even be clawed back, which is a whole nother conversation. So you can not only have full-blown accounting going in, but you can have it coming back. So let's say that a country used a payment process around a digital dollar, and they bought a hotel room, and then they paid for it. You've got the superannuation funds or the Social Security. You've got different taxing authorities, all, sales tax, use tax, property tax, all of it gets divided up. Everybody gets paid as the customer pays the actual vendor, like the hotel, the management company, all of it gets paid. But then what if the customer wants their money back? You can literally get all the funds back at the same time. And it can be an accounting process that's also accounted for at the same time. So what's important? Why does this matter? Well, it's really a massive race to the Pacific. And it's not just the Pacific, but the Pacific is the largest body of water in the world. And not just water, but landmass in the world, 175 million square miles. And when you, and I'll pull this up, and when you start understanding the different countries out there, you have depending on which ones you look at it, between 19 to 24, maybe even 27. It depends if you're pulling in some of the others that are actually potentials that can be wrapped into this. But think about what's happened with BRICS and what's happened with, and by the way, you can layer decentralized technology over the BRICS type ecosystem, which is a whole nother conversation for the future. But right now, it's a matter of how do these different countries that have their own sovereignty and their own currencies, how do they get into the digital ecosystem? And that's why the fight in the Pacific is such an important and massive topic. And that's why Hawaii is such a massive topic. But really, what we're talking about is the Hawaiian Islands, which was a kingdom and is a kingdom. And it's a people that actually understand that and they know it. This last week, I went to the top of the largest part of the Big Island. And at the top, we see observatories and we see telescopes that are crazy huge, like crazy huge. And we see mountains of just assets. People don't look at it that way. They just think that, that went off and it's nothing. But when we got done driving down that mountain, there were some cars parked off on the side of the road with some makeshift tents. And it was raining and the wind was pushing, and I pulled over and I was with a gentleman. I said, can you just give me some time? I just want to go and talk to these people and see why they're here. You see the flag of Hawaii flying upside down. And I just walked up to him. I walked near to the tents only to have a car that looked broken down, the window go down, and a lady inside of it says to me, can I help you? And I went over to her, and you all know me. I just told her why I was there, and I was as straight and pragmatic about, this is your land. You need to take it back, and technology is a way to do that. It's a way to be able to organize. It's not to do it because the people need to do it, but it's a way to be able to align and actually organize to take it back. And this lady, she's just heart of gold, absolute heart of gold. But you could tell that she had, through her life, she had dealt with trauma that most of us don't understand. And many would just judge her for living in her car. And I wouldn't say it was a mess, because it wasn't a mess. It was very organized. It was organized chaos, so to speak, with what she had. But after I told her why I was there and what I was looking for, and to try and find the right people to communicate that a message of a system is here, a decentralized system is here, where people can actually have their own identity. They can manage their own assets. They can manage their own disputes, or they can manage their own land. And she told me who to connect with, and she told me what to do and where to go. And, as I try and navigate through the ecosystem here, it's been very eye-opening to see the many different folks that feel the same way, but there's a little bit of a twist. One of them wants to be king. One of them wants to be queen. One of them wants to run this type of empire a certain way. One of them's taking money from that. One of them's just wants to live their life out and is done dealing with it. One of them's a fighter that's amazing, but his health is dwindling. But all of them in general understand some basic things, that there was a kingdom and it truly did exist, and it does exist. And all they have to do is unite together. But the question is, how do they unite? How do they come together? In what sequence? With who and how? And do they do it in the same way that's been done in other ecosystems, with the president, with the king, with the queen, with a ruler, a prime minister, a magistrate? How do they do it? And ultimately, when we look at what is being rolled out, you basically have a governance system, not a government. And that governance system can consist of pieces. So whether it's a constitution that historically exists, or maybe adoption of a declaration around centralization versus decentralization that exists, but then how it ties into councils And then how that, I'm going to refresh this, and how that ties into services that can be delivered by providers. So that model and ecosystem where technology can actually provide a system of governance is really key and really important. And so, anyhow, she was very honest. She was very bold and kind of abrasive, but that's because of what she'd been through. So, fast forward, we go through this event. We see what's happening in the Pacific, and today actually marks the first day of a massive topic, and this is kind of the first agenda, if you will. I don't want to do that. So, and this is a draft agenda for the first, at least a general council meeting that will be held for an interim governing council for the Hawaiian Islands. So this is very powerful. So it's not just, are we looking at just another nation? Because all these nations that I'm talking of, they've usually come off of models that are, some are from France, some are from Spain, some are from Britain. Some of them actually, like Vanuatu, it actually was double occupied by both France and Britain at the same time. They renamed themselves. They stood up for what was right. And these are not Polynesian. These are Micronesians in that particular part of the world. But what you're seeing is systems that are standing up. And particularly like with Vanuatu, in their constitution, they've defined that God is actually their ruler and who owns the land, and that they become subservient to that. And it's the similar type thing as in Fiji, whereas in Vanuatu is the land ownership is very difficult. It's usually the government owns the land and you can get a lease from them. So for those of you that have kind of grown up with, I'm an American, I've got an American dream, I'm going to get an American mortgage and I'm going to get an American house, and because I've got that house, I've got my way about me. Whether that's, you dream big and the houses are built a certain way and it costs a certain thing, and then you try and plug your mortgage into a certain dollar amount. And that's one of the big things that we're working on is how can you actually, I'll see if I can find. I'll pull up this one here. So these different homes here, one of the goals is to basically have a non-smart city, but at the same time, you've got intelligence in the materials and the actual properties and how they're built and how they're deployed, with a lot of standards and economies of scale. So the materials are very similar. You've got cyclone proof, fireproof, termite proof. You're thinking through some of the catastrophes that are out there. But the pricing side of it actually can come from mortgages that can be digital mortgages that are decentralized, based upon a currency or a reserve bank. Usually the reserve banks are actually what gets centralized. So it's a centralized reserve bank. When they talk about CBDCs, they're trying to centralize those assets. But in the ecosystem we're talking about here is, what if they can actually leverage a decentralized asset, get a decentralized digital mortgage, and get a home that their identity is not in the center of it. So it's counter to everything that is being built within these states, whereas the individual can actually have, it's not just, people think, well, if we got to decentralize, that means that I can't have this quality home. I get to go live in the mud somewhere. I know folks down in Australia that are just absolute truth setters. And that's all they do is focus on truth. And they're willing to say, you know what? I'll go live with the animals out in the middle of nowhere, and I'll try and grow my own food, and I'll try and get my own little eggs, and I'll try and the environment that's there, in my opinion, it just doesn't have to be looked at as far as that's the only option. If we can intelligently work together and organize, just like we have with the phones and with the storage, working with vendors, that this is their core competency. but financing them in such a way that it leverages digital payments that are truly decentralized. And as most of you know, that is when we talk about, the core fabric and root, we're talking about everything that we come down to is helping to decentralize systems for the individual to build a better future. So it's taking the power away from the many, or from the few, and giving it to the many. So when we think about, how a home, and how home financing, and how home payments, and how qualifying within the credit system for these different homes works, look at the compelling events that's happening in Lahaina. We're talking about, 2,800 structures that were just burnt beyond repair. 3,000 to 4,000 people that are just displaced. We're not even talking about the death and the terrible destruction that is just so raw. And I believe it's even going to get rawer because the people behind the accountability that was not taken to make sure that the sirens went off, to make sure that the water flowed when the fire trucks went there. Not to say the water, you hook up these lines and the next thing you know, you can't actually put it out and the fire trucks burn up. So it's just it's a crazy free for all, and it's not just in one location. There were 4 separate fires in 4 separate locations on Maui during that period. But how does it get rebuilt? And you've got to always listen to the individuals behind it, because they're not going to say, "Hey, come build this expensive things because we just want a handout." That's not who they are. Or we just want you to spend this kind of money to have this type of luxury. That's not who they are. They care about family, and they care about God, and they care about truth, and they care about what in New Zealand they talk about as whakapapa, family history, genealogy, who you are, where you come from. But there's a point where we can actually have good quality and balance in planning and freedom of these systems that can actually come together. Systems being, identity, land management, financial management, dispute management, the same types of systems that we're talking about within these services from this new Hawaiian nation. So how do you get your birth certificate that burn up? How do you get your marriage certificate that burn up? How do you validate reputation and not put it into some central credit system? How do you build a company and get financing for that company just like you would for an individual? How is it taxed? How is it accounted for? How is there not tyranny within a system like this? Which, by the way, in general, in the digital world, there is no tax. So I don't know if folks understood that, but it's basically the countries or the organization's ability to say, hey, in this jurisdiction, we're going to have tax. But in general, if it's a transaction, and this all complies with some of the other enslavement policies, whether you're looking at IRS code or other things, because you're not using the US dollar. It's literally a fully separate system outside of that system. Now, if you say, I want to go and convert from a digital dollar into a fiat dollar and use it on a Visa transaction, that's a possible income-based event that's taxable, but that's a different conversation. So what I'm trying to say is these different countries can have their own choice. Whether it's Vanuatu, which they don't tax the same way that everybody else is used to. They don't have the same types of income tax. Do they have sales tax? Yeah. They have property tax? No, they don't have a lot of property that can actually be purchased in what they call freehold licenses. They can be leased, but they basically get paid in a different way. And how can we learn from these different ecosystems? So for instance, some of these countries have actually gone through, like let's say Fiji. They went through a coup 20 plus years ago in 2 different ways. And then Vanuatu, recent type of, we're going to change our name, we're going to go back to our roots, and we're going to tax a certain way. Inside their constitution in Vanuatu is also decentralization, the actual word, and it says they will build their government around that. And I can tell you that the majority of the leaders in that country truly want to do that, but how it gets implemented, there's still a lot of questions. And so that's a lot of the work that you're seeing us do out here, is not just help a country like the Hawaiian nation to stand back up. I shouldn't say, It's these other countries that are already stood up. Tonga, Samoa, and now Niue, Atutaki or Rarotonga, and even Aotearoa. That's a whole nother conversation, which we won't get into today. But this is kind of an update from a technology standpoint. We've got big news. There's actually an ability when you create a digital asset, you can have multi-signature capabilities now. So what that means is you can create an asset, and like let's say that you have additional value that will be created. So it's not just you're going to authorize a certain amount and then issue a certain amount, but you want to issue more in the future. Well, right when you do that, you can actually go and say, these people are a part of a multi-sig wallet type transaction. And so you can invite other people to be a part of that, and the transaction won't consummate unless like 3 out of 5 are actually assign it in a certain time period. So it takes the governance process to a standpoint where you can truly have a governing council with multiple members, and you could even say, hey, we got 70 people on this council, and we're going to say that 50 people or 35 people or however many people have to approve a transaction cryptographically. So that means they just get a message, they agree to it, and it goes. But if they don't agree to it, that also goes. So that's a massive advancement, multi-sig capabilities. Some of the other things that have come through, I'm going to show you an interface for those of you that have come off of the digital world. This is a driver's license interface, and this is a newer system. So it actually has a little bit more advanced features. That's something that has actually been upgraded around the driver's license side of it. Also, you'll notice a look and feel and design that's kind of being implemented, and it will scale back. So for those that are not aware, in the open source world, the digital world is kind of a global jurisdiction around digital assets, but you may have countries or provinces or counties or cities or states that say that they want to actually adopt it. And so there's a centralized instance of them adopting it. So their own database, which is centralized, but it's what people have to understand is that database that's centralized with their own brand and instance, that can have unique use cases for their environment that can be customized. And that's the value of open source. But you can also have a layer that's in between it all. So like a blockchain layer, like what the digital world layer exchange is, that can basically have truth among all of these ecosystems. So whether it's a country or a county or a country with its own currency or not, you can literally transact within those different ecosystems, a cross-border, if you will. And you probably heard cross-border before. Ripple is probably where you've heard it from. And we'll be able to interface with the Ripple technology as well as Stellar technology into the future. So I'm going to stop. I've blabbed a lot. There's been a lot that's happened this last week. But any questions or thoughts or comments or anything that folks would like to bring up or review?
Michael, what's the significance of these ISO 2022 coins? Do you follow that at all?
It's just from what I understand, it's a way to finance. It's not an ICO, an initial coin offering. It's a new way to finance based upon, receiving funds. Similar to what you would get like a private placement memorandum, but they're trying to layer on some intelligence that can actually prove that you're not selling something over and over and over again. Like with a private placement memorandum, you can have a certain number of shares issued or stock issued, and who's to say you haven't sold it twice? And this new system basically enables that type of thing. It could actually run within this digital world ecosystem. It's very easy for them to go and do that. So
yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't say ICO. I said the ISO, was it 222?
You're talking about a certification, or are you talking about
the certification for financial standards? Evidently there's like 6.
Yeah, so we've actually got a team member that focuses on that, and we've done some due diligence around what does it take to get involved in that? And it's really just you're going through the compliance, you're walking through the front door, and you're going through the compliance ecosystem to do it. Ripple and Stellar are actually on that list for some of these transactions as it relates to what we're talking about. And we can basically do technically everything that they're doing. The question is, do we want to organize ourselves in such a way where we're going to actually jump through the same hoops that they're jumping through? So.
Got it. Thanks.
Mm-hmm. Next question, thought, feedback, observation. Shooting holes, critical, anything.
Morgan from Australia. Thank you so much for your presentation. Fascinating. I'm in the financial services industry myself, and having currently my daughter studying overseas in the university in Europe, every time we transfer funds to the university through the IBAC, the IBAC requirement, I often wonder if there'll be a time if, the course that's studied by one of our children in the future is not recognised or not liked by the elite, if you like, that they can block the payments at any given time or the transfer of funds. To start in to be in medicine, for example, but it could be anything that the elite might not like. I'm just trying to get my head around the future, I haven't got a digital wallet. I haven't gone down that far, but I'm just sort of trying to sort of work out where we all belong in the future without being centralized and someone pulling the strings over our lives. Through this season and so forth. Yeah.
Really, really good observation and question, and welcome to the conversation. There's no wrong time to start. So welcome. You're in the right place.
Thanks for
I would say around transactions and payments, there's going to be three things that are really concerning. And this comes out of the programmable money executive order from Mr. Biden back in February, not this year, but the year prior. And it's going to basically rank in time. So if you don't spend funds, you can lose funds. So when if it sounds like you're from Australia, there's a certain type of dole, or in the US, it'd be welfare. Food stamps and money can be placed into this system. So, there's going to be a financial crisis that's even worse than anything we've all experienced so far. And the government, they'll be able to save us. They're going to save us all. And I'm saying that sarcastically, by the way. And
of course.
And they'll throw money at us. And in time, if you don't use the money, you'll lose the money. So that's one thing. If you travel and they don't want you traveling, they can control where you go and what you do. Your money won't work. So if you go to certain jurisdictions, it just won't work. And then the third side of it is when people say, well, I can spoof my GPS and I can spoof this. I'm sorry. But once they understand that these electronic SIMs tied with the IMEI numbers to the actual GPS that's built into the phones, you don't get around that. And so that's why building our own phones that are truly separate. And the hard thing is it's really difficult to get suppliers to actually want to build them. Like we had to pay money to get 5G pulled out of the phones. Like literally, you'd think that, well, we don't want that high advanced new feature. We actually had to pay a lot of money to get it removed, which is another conversation. So you've got time, location, and then the third one is around type. So what if they don't want you buying ammunition, or they don't want you buying certain types of things? They just make it so the money doesn't work. And right now, this may be something that's in the future and we don't really think a lot about, but it's not really hard to see when, and we're getting some feedback there. It's not really hard to see when you leave your phone at home or a Visa at home, and you've put all your world into a couple different accounts, which, by the way, this last week, JP Morgan Chase has come out, and basically JP Morgan Chase, I'll go through that in just a second, has come out and said anything crypto, we're just going to stop it and deny it. So they're double downing on everything that they're doing there, which may have a whole nother level of cause and issue or concern. So I hope I've answered your question, or at least maybe sparked some thoughts. It sounds like you come out of the financial industry. The real benefit and value of a decentralized system is really around the reporting and auditing and the forensics. Believe it or not, you can actually have some really good forensic systems that automatically look at what's going on. Has this person done something wrong, and would it relate to others? So because you can trace where funds come from and where they're going, it's also easy to find people that are not doing the right thing. They're doing something that is fraudulent or wrong. So you can kind of get, with technology, you can get that to boil to the top, even cross-chain type stuff. So maybe they did something wrong in Monero, move out of Monero into Bitcoin, Bitcoin to Ripple, Ripple to digital, and next thing you know, you're able to triangulate all that stuff all the way back. Let's say they were selling something that wasn't appropriate. You can literally trace it back with technology. So there's a key around how can us humans actually intelligently use machine learning and artificial intelligence for the betterment of humanity, not to its demise. So does that make sense to you?
Yeah, thank you so much. It was more an observation and the fear of the future, really, when it comes to transactions, rather than direct question. But you've answered it beautifully. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, welcome to the call, and appreciate your question. We'll take another question or thought or feedback or observation or what you're seeing in your side of the world.
And sorry, the other comment that I should make, here in Melbourne, you go to the airport, it's all cashless now. You can't buy food or coffee or anything anywhere without using credit cards. So they're squeezing us, and on the planes as well. Cash is,
I would like to first off, I think how people are seeing that all over the place. I actually remember going to a national park last week on the Big Island, and there was no credit cards that were allowed there. And you wonder why. Well, now they know who's been there. They know who's coming, who's going. There's just tons of data that you can collect on that. But since you're calling from the Melbourne area, and since we just talked about Lahaina, for me, there's been some questions, and maybe this, you don't even know about this or not, or maybe it's just pie in the sky. But I believe that there are 3 different fires that are very questionable, that are different than any kind of fires that we've seen because of the type of resin and how they're left behind, the heat that they burn at, and the geography in which they're burning. And so what I'm talking about is, 1, there's a fire in Paradise, California. 2, there's a fire in Lahaina, which is the most recent one. But in between there was a massive fire. It just so happened to conveniently be there in Australia, and there's lots of fires, but there was a massive one that burnt really weird 2 years ago, and it burnt right where they were questioning they needed to run a rail, but there were so many landowners who were like, we're not going to do that. We're not on the same page with that. Could you provide your observation? And just, I don't know you from Adam. I don't even know your name or how you got here.
No, that's all right. I bought one of the phones a couple of years ago, and through James, but I've kept a very passive approach to it, and I'm just trying to work myself out. But the observation is that we've had some very, very on the eastern seaboard. There's been a bit of a talk of a smart city sort of movement through rail connections and so forth. And then, funny enough, we had a 1 in a 100-year event of flooding on top of the fires. So the land changes, the degradation of the land has been enormous, and the people have been suffering a lot. So look, I don't have any evidence of it. I am on a couple of channels on Telegram that have been posting some things that are they showed photos, they showed the resin that you refer to. While those blue umbrellas didn't burn out in Hawaii in the fires there, I don't know. There's something that some sort of mechanism that they cause these fires with, but there's definitely things that are very, very smelly. Yeah, very, very smelly. And half of Greece was on fire. We've got so many fires in America. We've had to Hawaii, and you just got to wonder what's happening. And it's got nothing to do with climate change. We know that.
Yeah.
things more deliberate, I think, that are happening out there.
I think you've articulated the concern very well, and so it'll be interesting to see how humanity asks their own questions and uses their own deductive reasoning and thought processes around it, because the data is overwhelming at this stage. And there's some people that actually get even upset with me because I don't react to the reality of it, but they're just emphatic that we're at war. This is an attack, and and many rights, they're absolutely right, but and it's an attack with a natural thing like fire. But there's pieces of these things that are just not adding up, and they're not
adding up.
Yeah.
Dr. David Martin, I've been following a lot of his presentations, and he talks about fire being used over the centuries as a tool as a war type tool to move people on and make norms change, using nature to cause the upheaval.
Yeah.
So definitely.
I really respect David Martin. I've had many meals with him and meetings with him, and just honor his dedication. He's put his life in jeopardy, and his family's life in jeopardy, and
he's an absolute hero for me.
He's speaking truth, and he's standing up for what it is, and he's calling it what it is, and he's going about it a different way. So what you see here is a different approach. We're kind of playing the long game around. Okay, so like David Martin will end up with lawsuits, and then maybe 3 or 4 years from now, certain results. But we believe that we have to act now. We have to act immediately, and we have to build countermeasures that are in parallel. When I say in parallel, so for instance, I go through this website here, right? And I go through some of the sponsors that are on it and some of these companies. So what are we going to do to counterbalance this? Well, here's clear.co.com. I'm going to click on competition in the top right. And this is actually product by product or function by function what we actually compete with. So you've got Apple, right? So these are the different platforms. So, FaceTime. Well, and actually I would argue, this is old data, I would argue that this Clear Signal platform will actually be a standard. And it, not only that, it's already, I use this application more than I do all my other apps combined. And I believe some of the stuff that happens with some of the platforms in the future, maybe X is involved, maybe identity is involved, maybe cryptography is involved, maybe the ability to link in multiple different messaging platforms. Maybe you've got FaceTime and Signal and Clear Signal and these different platforms that can all communicate together, WhatsApp included, because WhatsApp comes from the same roots as Signal, and it comes from the same roots as Clear Signal. So the point that I'm not trying to dive into one app, but what I'm trying to say is it's not just Apple, but it's Google, it's Amazon, Facebook, Microsoft, IBM, and even domain elements. But when you look at the comparison between leveraging open source platforms that are maybe not always 100% equivalent. So this service delivery network, it does the same thing. ClearOS server is exactly the same thing as IBM. We could put Oracle up here as well, because Oracle basically does the same server build as that. But the net is you're seeing how we're building a parallel system where technology can actually directly replace, so that humanity has a choice. Because we can talk about, and David Martin does an amazing job, not just about talking, but actually saying, I'm going to come after you in this way, and this body of organization is going to come after you in this way, and we're going to provide this type of unity. And I pray for him and many others like him that continue to basically talk truth. And their main truth, their mainly truth is around, a virus and health and pharmaceuticals and other conspiracies that kind of have been proven to not be conspiracies but fact. But we really we look at every single day all of us use a phone, and all of us actually would like to say, I do want an alternative. I don't want to just say because of convenience that Apple is going to be my choice. One of the big things that actually happened, I don't know if people saw it, but China basically said, no, if you're in the government, you're not using Apple. Done. And so you'll start seeing more and more of that. You'll see Apple come out with campaigns that say, hey, we're doing this in this way so your data is not compromised. But, and who knows? Maybe in the end, they end up giving encryption keys out. I highly, highly doubt it. But that's a different topic. So we'll go ahead and go to the next question. Thanks for your feedback and your observations.
Thank you, Michael.
Next comment, thoughts, feedback?
Hey, Michael, it's Terrence. How are you?
Good. Good to hear your voice.
Yeah, you too, mate. Managed to pass the driver's test and the application for the driver's license.
Which environment did you do that in? Because you can do it like the most advanced one to do it in is actually, and I've got the interface up, is actually the Hawaiian environment, believe it or not. So this environment here versus this environment here.
I did it through my own digital world login. So I guess in my own back end in the greater digital world, not as
by the way, your Life app will actually log you into multiple environments, but don't get confused by that. I guess you're going to have to figure that out because you're going to have to support it too. But did you have an okay time uploading your driver's license or downloading the results?
As for uploading the driver's license, I'd have to see if I can see the file, but there was no notification saying it didn't happen. I then proceeded through to do the test, which I nearly failed because it's Utah specific, and particularly the speed limit in the business district in Utah. When I did research on different websites to try and find that, it was all a bit different. So I did fail. I passed the test, but got 4 wrong and nearly failed the test ultimately because it is Utah specific. So I don't know if we
I actually don't think it's Utah specific, but I do hear what you're saying. Like you've got stuff on right hand driving, left hand driving, interactions like that. That's getting real fast. So.
There's one question that specifically says Utah Business District.
Does it? Yeah.
Yeah. So
very interesting. Maybe we could take a task on that and pop that over to. That'd probably go to Vic Az's tape.
Yeah, and that I did respond in an email to you about the fact that it's not spitting out a license at the end and.
That actually works within this ecosystem, whereas I think this ecosystem here will get updated tomorrow, if I remember. It's on the map to do that. So
okay. Yeah, so that was fine. Happy to wait for that to happen, of course. But yeah, just wanted to give that feedback that it's fun and challenging to actually go in and start using these products or these services. So,
now's the time to start standing on it. So thank you for doing that. Appreciate it.
Well, I want to go through and register my car as an asset and get a number plate and start to drive around in the jurisdiction. And due to the fact that our police vehicles here have number plate license reading, I will then be pulled over because it will show a non-registration, and then I'll be having the discussion. But I'd like to also have a dual citizenship to then say I'm a dual citizen of the digital world and of Australia in the state of Queensland, and this is why I have an alternate number plate on. So that's my thought process and my goal to realize in the real world these services that we are all talking about here.
That's wonderful. Yeah, that objective is a serious one, and thank you for taking that leap of faith. And it's not going to be easy as the awareness and adoption happens and the education process happens to law enforcement, especially as we go different jurisdictions, because it's going to be a different reality in Australia versus the US. So.
Yeah, and I work closely with a senior sergeant on some events I do on the weekends, and he's a senior sergeant of traffic. So he's the man to be able to have these conversations with. And to your point about logging in with Clear Life, I was able to log into Hawaiian Life with my Clear Life app, so that did work for me. And I'm just logging back into my digital world right now to see if my license was uploaded and is sitting there visible, I guess, in services.
It should have to go through a process to print it and mail it to you. So it actually does that. But there should be an interface that you should see where you can actually see a sample of it too. So
yeah, I'm not seeing here, but I am seeing my digital ID and my date of birth and so on, and it's pending.
That's wonderful.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you for all that you do for so many for so long, and we really appreciate you being along with this journey. And I look forward to spending more time with you in the future. Hopefully, paths cross as it's intended. But thank you so much for always being here and supporting folks. So we'll take.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you a lot. We'll take one more question unless we don't have a lot to discuss, and if not, then we'll go ahead and adjourn for today. Thoughts, feedback, anything? Okay. We'll go ahead and wrap up then. Have a wonderful week. We'll be doing a lot more this next week based upon things that occurred earlier today. We've got one of the first general council meetings that will happen for the Hawaiian Kingdom /nation/country. So that's a big deal. That'll be happening today. And then we're going to be doing a lot more on the home side of things. So when you're seeing these different model homes, there's actually some other ones that are coming up. Some of them that'll go up to over 3,000 square feet. So we will be doing that. We'll be building out some of these as models, and then trying to build some of the ecosystems within the Lahaina area around modeling. So right now we're just letting the dust settle, so to speak. But the technology from the digital world side of it to enable the Hawaiian life to be able to take hold, that should be able to go in parallel of actually now building these systems. So we'll report out on how that goes. We'll see a couple of new models, and maybe some of your folks on the call, instead of buying a phone, you might actually want to buy a house, which is a whole nother conversation. But
sounds good.
Yeah. Much love, everybody, and we will talk to you soon.
Thank you, Michael. God bless. All the best. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. You can use them all. We'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.